Robbers Cave experiment, conducted in 1954 by Muslim sheriff and his colleagues at Mountain Lake Park in Oklahoma, USA, aimed to investigate intergroup conflict and the potential for reducing tension between groups. 22 physically healthy and socially stable boys, aged 11-12 years, were chosen by the researchers. They were randomly divided into two groups, the Eagle group and the Snake group. These groups were kept separate and unaware of each other's existence. During this phase, the groups were pitted against each other in competitive activities, such as soccer matches, races, and collective tasks. The success of one group meant the defeat of the other, leading to a hostile and tense atmosphere. The boys exhibited aggressive behavior, resorting to violence and insults directed at members of the opposing group. To alleviate the conflict, the researchers implemented measures to foster cooperation and create a friendly atmosphere between the groups. These measures included establishing joint goals that required collaboration, defining these goals, facilitating opportunities for mutual contact, and organizing non-competitive social activities and meals where members from both groups could interact. The results of the experiment indicated a significant decrease in hostility and aggression between the groups following the integration phase. The boys started forming positive relationships and engaging in cooperative behavior not only with each other but also with the scientists. Sheriff's experiment was one of the earliest studies to validate the importance of cooperative tasks and intergroup contact in mitigating conflict and promoting positive relationships between different groups. It is worth noting that the experiment faced ethical criticism due to the emotional stress imposed on the participants. Subsequently, ethical standards were revised, and stricter regulations were implemented for similar experiments in the future. The Sheriff experiment holds great significance in the advancement of intergroup relations theory and our understanding of conflicts between different groups. The experiment's findings underscored the importance of shared tasks and cooperation in diminishing hostility among groups, while also shedding light on the psychological processes underlying prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. Despite its historical importance, Sheriff's experiment faced criticism regarding its methodology and the representativeness of the sample used. Critics argued that the experiment's scope was limited as it focused on a small group of boys of the same age, making it challenging to generalize the results to other groups or age categories. Additionally, some participants experienced negative emotional repercussions due to the hostile atmosphere created during the experiment. Notwithstanding these limitations, Sheriff's experiment has had a profound impact on research related to intergroup dynamics and conflict resolution. It demonstrated that fostering a cooperative environment and facilitating positive interactions between group members can effectively reduce hostility. These principles have found practical applications across various domains, including education, organizational psychology, and international politics. They have served as the foundation for the development of programs aimed at addressing prejudice and resolving conflicts. Following the integration and conflict reduction phase, the researchers proceeded to the final stage of the experiment known as the evaluation phase. This phase aimed to assess the participants' opinions and impressions of their experience and intergroup relationships. The majority of the boys expressed positive emotions and reported forming new friendships with members of the opposing group. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society. Sheriff's experiment, overall, brought attention to the significance of intergroup interactions and their influence on stereotyping, prejudice, and conflict. It had a lasting impact on subsequent research in the fields of social psychology and intergroup dynamics. Furthermore, the experiment served as a catalyst for the development and implementation of interventions and programs dedicated to reducing prejudice and fostering tolerance among diverse groups within society.
In 1961, social psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a renowned and influential study known as the Milgram Experiment. This study aimed to explore the extent to which individuals would obey authority figures, even if it meant acting against their own moral principles. Volunteers were recruited for the experiment under the pretense of participating in a study focused on the effects of punishment on memory and learning. The participants were assigned to two roles, teacher and student, with the emphasis on the role of the teacher. The participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to the student whenever they made a mistake during a task. The voltage levels started with mild doses but progressively increased throughout the experiment. However, the student was actually an actor, and no real electric shocks were delivered. What made this experiment fascinating was that despite the student screaming in pain, requesting the experiment to stop, and even refusing to answer questions, the experimenters insisted on continuing. The participants were subjected to an atmosphere of authority, convincing them that they had to comply with the instructions. One intriguing outcome of the experiment was that the majority of participants displayed obedience by administering electric shocks to the student, even when they witnessed the student as evident physical or emotional distress. Some participants were so submissive that they administered the highest level of shock, disregarding the student as clear as. Milgram experiment delved further into exploring the factors that influenced participants' obedience levels. Various variations of the experiment were conducted by Milgram, involving changes in context, location, the role of the authority figure, and other variables. An intriguing observation was that the level of obedience diminished when the experiment took place in a less prestigious setting or when conflicts rose among authority figures. This suggests that contextual and social factors can have an impact on participants' decision-making processes. Furthermore, it was discovered that the presence or absence of social support influenced the level of obedience. If another participant, assuming the role of the teacher, refused to continue the experiment or voiced doubts, it affected the behavior and decisions of other participants. A significant finding of the experiment was that even ordinary individuals, who are not inherently violent or aggressive, can succumb to significant obedience and commit morally questionable acts under the influence of an authority figure. This provides insights into how morally and ethically objectionable actions can be carried out within certain Milgram experiment subsequently became one of the primary studies supporting the banality of evil theory, which suggests that ordinary people can engage in cruel acts under the sway of social and authoritative influences. However, Milgram experiment also raised ethical concerns regarding the psychological discomfort and stress experienced by the participants. As a result, it has now become customary to conduct such experiments in a tightly regulated and ethical manner that safeguards the rights and well-being of the participants. The Milgram experiment has emerged as a highly influential and extensively studied study within the realm of social psychology. Its findings have sparked widespread discussions and propelled further research into areas such as obedience, ethics, and the impact of social factors on decision-making. One crucial aspect explored in Milgram's experiment revolved around the factors that influence participants' resistance. The study revealed that the level of obedience was significantly influenced by individual personalities. Some individuals exhibited a greater inclination to obey and were more prone to making erroneous decisions under the influence. Additionally, the experiment delved into various factors that influence participants' behavior. For instance, when participants were able to witness the physical presence of the student and not solely rely on auditory cues, levels of obedience decreased. This highlights the significance of empathy and visual contact when making moral judgments and following Milgram's research. Subsequent experiments have been conducted to further explore the factors influencing obedience and submission. Some of these experiments have introduced contextual changes to examine how behavior might vary in different situations. For instance, in one variation of the Milgram experiment, an ordinary participant replaced the authority figure in giving instructions. Consequently, the level of obedience decreased as the authority figure's role was not as prominent as in the original experiment. This suggests that the influence of the authority figure and its impact on behavior. Other experiments have demonstrated that levels of obedience can decrease when participants witness others refusing to follow incorrect instructions. This finding underscores the significance of social support and the influence of social groups on decision-making. Further research has also identified certain factors that can increase obedience, such as the presence of a prestigious or authoritative institution, normative pressure from a group, or the expectation of a reward. Milgram's experiment has been instrumental in enhancing our understanding of human behavior and moral decision-making within the context of authority and social influence. It revealed that even ordinary individuals can succumb to submission and engage in misconduct under the pressure of authority. These findings have noteworthy implications for anal. However, it is important to acknowledge that Milgram's experiment raised ethical concerns and has faced criticism regarding the protection and well-being of participants. The ethical aspect and the well-being of the participants are crucial considerations in relation to the Milgram experiment. The participants in the experiment experienced significant psychological discomfort, stress, and emotional strain. They were exposed to situations that could have had potentially damaging effects on their mental well-being. Criticism has been directed towards the Milgram experiment for its violation of ethical principles and the lack of adequate safeguards and voluntary measures for the participants. The field of research now adheres to strict ethical standards, which include obtaining informed consent from participants and ensuring their rights and well-being are brought. The ethical concerns raised by the Milgram experiment have had a profound impact on the research methodology in social psychology. Present-day experiments prioritize ethical considerations, aiming to safeguard the participants and minimize any potential psychological or emotional influences. As a result, the Milgram experiment stands as an important study that has sparked discussions on obedience and social influence. It has prompted further contemplation on the ethical and safety aspects of psychological experiments, ultimately leading to the establishment of rigorous ethical standards and regulations in research. The Bobo doll experiment, conducted in 1961 by psychologist Albert Bandura, presented compelling evidence supporting social learning theory and underscored the significance of behavior modeling in the learning process. Bandura utilized a large inflatable doll known as the Bobo doll in the experiment. The objective was to observe how children would imitate aggressive behavior they witnessed in adults, aiming to test the hypothesis that children can acquire new behaviors through observation. In the experiment, Bandura divided the children into 3 groups. The first group observed an adult model, either male or female, displaying aggressive behavior towards the Bobo doll. The second group observed an adult engaging with another toy without aggression. The third group, serving as the control group, was not exposed to any specific observe. After observing the model, the children were given the opportunity to play with the Bobo doll in a designated room while their behavior was recorded on video. The results of the experiment demonstrated that children who witnessed aggressive behavior from the adult model were more likely to exhibit aggression during their play with the Bobo doll comp. This experiment highlighted the crucial role of observational learning and established that children are capable of imitating and reproducing behaviors they observe in others. It further emphasized the influence of the social environment on the formation and development of children as behavior. The Bobo doll experiment has significant practical applications and relevance in the fields of psychology and education. The experiment involving the Bobo doll yielded noteworthy findings that underscored the significance of behavior modeling in shaping children as behavioral patterns. Bandura's study revealed that observing others, particularly models who exhibit specific behaviors, can have a profound influence on children as actions and the development of their skills. A key concept emerging from the experiment is the notion of social modeling as a means of learning. Children can acquire new behaviors by observing others and imitating their actions. In the context of the Bobo doll experiment, children observed an adult engaging in aggressive behavior towards the doll and subsequently replicated this behavior during. It's crucial to acknowledge that Bandura's experiment not only demonstrated that children can imitate aggressive behaviors but also revealed that they can express aggression in a heightened manner compared to the observed model. This phenomenon, known as aggressive expansion, suggests that children can reproduce and even reinforce the behaviors. Bandura's experiment had a significant impact on our understanding of children as learning and development. It emphasized the role of the environment and the influence of models, while also raising questions about the effects of media violence and the impact of aggressive behavior on children. The Bobo doll experiment showcased that children can acquire new skills and behaviors through observation. It emphasized the necessity of providing a safe and supportive environment for children to realize their potential. This further emphasized the critical role of the social environment in shaping behavior and prompted further research into social. The Bobo doll experiment not only highlighted children's capacity to adopt aggressive behavior but also shed light on their ability to learn various types of behavior through modeling. Subsequent research has demonstrated that children can acquire positive and socially desirable skills when they observe them in role models. Furthermore, the Bobo doll experiment contributed to our understanding of the psychological mechanisms underlying observational learning. Albert Bandura's social learning theory emphasizes the role of attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. According to this theory, for children to learn new behaviors, they need to pay attention to the M. The Bobo doll experiment generated significant interest and sparked discussions within the scientific and educational communities. It underscored the influence of the environment on shaping children as behavior and initiated a debate on the limitations and ethical considerations of conducting such research. The impact of the Bobo doll experiment has extended to various fields of psychology and education. It has facilitated a deeper comprehension of the mechanisms involved in observational learning and the influence of role models on behavioral development. These findings have practical applications in the design of teaching methods, the cultivation of. In conclusion, Albert Bonder's Bobo doll experiment was a pivotal study that illuminated the significance of behavior modeling in children as learning processes. It has spurred further research and enriched our understanding of how children learn and develop behaviorally. The Levinason Experiment, conducted in 1939 by Soviet psychologists Sergei Levinason and Alexander Lasser, aimed to investigate children as cognitive development and the concepts of semantic disintegration. The experiment involved observing and interpreting dialogues between children and adults, with a particular focus on changes in the meaning of statements and the child's comprehension of the adult's intentions. Levinason and Lasser sought to understand how children perceive and adapt their understanding based on the context and situation. A key concept explored in the experiment was meaning decay or meaning spillover. This concept reflects a child's ability to associate one word or expression with another based on their semantic relationship. Researchers observed how children reorganized their ideas about the world in response to new information and experiences, and how these chart. One notable finding from the experiment was the identification of the phenomena of diving and rising contexts. In a diving context, children would associate words or expressions with their prior knowledge and experiences without considering new information. For example, if a child were asked, "When a bee gets sick, it flies to," and the chill. The Levinason experiment explored the impact of context on children as understanding and their ability to incorporate new information. In the enhancing context, children considered the new information and adjusted their understanding accordingly. For instance, in the previous example, if the child was informed that bees fly to flowers, their subsac. Additionally, the experiment examined the dynamics of interaction between children and adults during the dialogues. Researchers observed that adults often introduced novel elements into the conversation, providing children with information they were previously unaware of. For example, an adult might say, "Look, a bird is flying too." This new info. Levinason's experiment was significant in enhancing our understanding of cognitive development in children and the concepts of meaning decay. It provided insights into how children assimilate and adapt to new information, how their conceptualizations of the world evolve, and how their language comprehension develops. Levinason's experiment made a significant contribution to the field of psychological science, particularly in the areas of child development and language comprehension. Levinason and Lasser proposed that semantic decomposition played a vital role in children's understanding of the world and language acquisition. According to their hypothesis, children not only memorize individual words and their meanings but also actively construct semantic connections between words based on context and experience. To investigate this, the researchers engaged children in dialogues, presenting them with various situations and tasks. Throughout the experiment, close attention was paid to changes in the children's responses and their ability to adapt their understanding in light of new information. The researchers examined the errors made by the children, how they reorganized their ideas about the world, and how these changes were reflected in their comprehension of language. For instance, in one experiment, children were exposed to sentences containing incorrect word usage. For example, they might be shown a red apple and told, "This is a green apple." The researchers then asked questions to assess how the children interpreted and explained the contradiction between the words and the visual information. The researchers also investigated the role of context and interaction with adults in the comprehension process. They examined how children utilize contextual cues and benefited from adult support to adapt their comprehension. Adults played a crucial role in providing new information and assisting children in restructuring their understanding. Levinason's experiment highlighted that children actively participate in shaping their thinking processes and understanding of language. They are not passive recipients of information but rather engage in the active construction of connections between words and concepts based on their experiences and the provided context. Levinason's experiment yielded fascinating findings, including the observation that children possess a remarkable capacity for adaptability and flexibility in their understanding. They can reorganize their conceptual frameworks and adjust their comprehension of language in response to new information and contexts. The researchers also noted variations in the abilities of children across different age groups. Younger children may exhibit a tendency towards semantic disintegration, perceiving words in isolation, while older children demonstrate a greater ability to adapt to context and integrate new information. The practical implications of Levinason's experiment are significant. It deepened our understanding of how children assimilate information and the factors that influence their comprehension. This knowledge can inform educational strategies and learning approaches that account for individual differences in children's development and understanding. The experiment's theoretical implications are equally noteworthy. It contributed to the advancement of the semantic decay concept and its influence on cognitive development and language acquisition. This concept has become a cornerstone in developmental psychology, shedding light on the processes involved in the formation of mental representations. Despite being conducted in 1939, Levinason's experiment continues to wield substantial influence in the field of developmental psychology. It served as a catalyst for further research, enriching our understanding of the development of thinking and language in children. Levinason's experiment made significant contributions to the understanding of the transition from concrete to abstract thinking in children. The researchers focused on how children begin to use symbols and signs as representations to comprehend the world around them. One crucial area of investigation was the development of language use in children. The researchers observed how children gradually employ words and expressions to describe and explain objects and events. They also explored how children engage in symbolic play, where objects or actions serve as representations for other objects or actions. Furthermore, the experiment underscored the significance of context and situation in language comprehension. Researchers examined how children leverage contextual cues and environmental information to enhance their understanding of words and expressions. It is noteworthy that Levinason's experiment was not an isolated study. Rather, it served as a foundation for subsequent research on children's thinking and language development. Numerous scientists and psychologists have continued to explore these areas, expanding our knowledge of the cognitive processes involved in children's development. The Hofling Experiment, conducted by psychologist Marian Brentano Hofling in 1966, aimed to examine the behavior of medical personnel when faced with nonverbal orders given by an authority figure. The experiment sought to determine the level of obedience among medical personnel when confronted with instructions that contradicted established protocols and safety guidelines. This investigation was particularly relevant in the medical field, where following incorrect orders could have severe consequences for patients. Hofling's experiment involved 22 nurses employed at various hospitals in Northern California. Using a carefully crafted script, the researchers simulated scenarios in which the nurses received unrealistic and potentially harmful instructions from unfamiliar doctors regarding patient care. Crucially, these doctors were not actual healthcare professionals but rather individuals hired by the researchers. They instructed the nurses to administer an overdose of an unfamiliar and potent drug, misleadingly presented as a new pharmaceutical product. This situation posed a significant risk to the patient's well-being. The results of the experiment were indeed startling. Nearly all of the nurses, 21 out of 22, obediently followed the orders of the doctors and were prepared to administer the drug, despite its dangerous nature and the violation of established safety protocols. This outcome highlighted the profound influence of trust in authority, even when medical personnel, despite their expertise, are susceptible to obeying inappropriate orders when they originate from an authoritative figure. This phenomenon can be attributed to various factors, including social conditioning, fear of authority, and a lack of self-confidence. It is worth acknowledging that Hofling's experiment generated significant attention and sparked a debate about the ethical implications of such research. Critics argued that participants may have experienced stress and anxiety due to the dangerous situations they were placed in, and that the experiment did not accurately replicate real-world medical. Nevertheless, the impact of Hofling's experiment on our understanding of subordination and power dynamics cannot be overlooked. It emphasized the necessity of training medical professionals in ethical principles, fostering critical thinking skills, and equipping them to navigate situations where they encounter contradictory or hazardous instructions. Furthermore, the experiment underscored the importance of establishing effective communication processes and cultivating an open environment within the medical field to prevent errors and enhance patient safety. Many medical organizations have implemented additional safeguards and protocols to minimize the likelihood of complying with incorrect A group of 22 nurses from various hospitals in Northern California was recruited to participate in the experiment. They were informed that the study aimed to assess the quality of nursing care. The experimenters designed scenarios in which the nurses received phone calls from unfamiliar physicians who claimed to be the physician on duty. These physicians instructed the nurses to administer a medication that exceeded the recommended dose and violated safety rules. Observers closely monitored the nurses' reactions to the instructions, noting whether they complied or refused to comply. The nurses' emotional states and statements were also recorded during the experiment. Once the experiment concluded, the collected data was analyzed to determine the number of nurses who obeyed the incorrect instructions and administered the dangerous drug. The results of Hofling experiment, as previously mentioned, revealed that the majority of nurses, 21 out of 22, complied with instructions from unfamiliar physicians and were willing to administer the dangerous drug, thus disregarding established safety protocols. This highlights the significant influence that authority and social context can have. Hofling experiment demonstrated that even highly skilled and experienced professionals may have a propensity to obey authority figures, even when the instructions are inappropriate or violate established guidelines. Hofling experiment provided compelling evidence that the authority and status of the instruction give a significantly impact people's behavior. Despite instructions contradicting protocols or violating safety procedures, many nurses complied, perceiving them as requirements from a physician. It is important to consider that Hofling experiment was conducted in a controlled setting where nurses lacked the opportunity to seek confirmation from colleagues or consult the prescribing physician regarding the drug. In real clinical practice, where robust communication and verification processes exist, the response may differ. Hofling experiment generated ethical discussions surrounding the potential stress and anxiety experienced by medical personnel and the potential compromise of patient safety. This highlights the importance of upholding ethical principles and safeguarding the rights and well-being of research participants. The results of Hofling experiment underscore the significance of training healthcare professionals in critical thinking, situational assessment, and effective communication skills. Such training empowers medical staff to make informed decisions even in the face of conflicting instructions. Remarkably, despite being conducted over half a century ago, Hofling experiment remains relevant and continues to influence the realms of psychology, medical ethics, and healthcare management. The experiment sheds light on the complexities of authority, decision-making, and the importance of considering these factors in healthcare settings. This experiment garnered attention and sparked further investigation into the psychology of social influence and obedience to authority. It emerged as a pivotal study in this domain, serving as inspiration for other scientists and psychologists to explore similar aspects. Subsequent studies have upheld the findings of Hofling experiment while broadening our comprehension of the power of authority and compliance. Notably, Stanley Milgram conducted experiments subsequent to Hofling examining the extent to which individuals are willing to comply with the directives of an authority figure, even when those directives follow-up research, conducted with greater rigor and ethical considerations, has delved into the impact of obedience across diverse contexts such as organizational settings, medicine, and the military. These studies have contributed to the development of teaching strategies and approaches aimed at fostering critical thinking and ethical conduct among. In summary, Hofling experiment holds substantial significance in comprehending the influence of authority and social circumstances on human behavior. It underscores the importance of imparting ethical principles, cultivating independent thinking, and critically evaluating information to make well-informed decisions. This experiment continues to be